morning, everyone. Hey, if you're a guest this morning, we're super glad you're here to worship with us. As a church, it's our vision to connect people to Jesus and love our community. Today, we're moving forward in this series, Move It, that we've been hanging out in for a couple of weeks, looking at this idea that the gospel of Jesus, the forgiveness and what Jesus did on the cross, it should drive us towards action. Hey, it's not a sit still and observe type thing. It should push us into doing something. And so week one, we kind of laid this foundation that our salvation, that's the first action of being saved. It's a standing promise with a moving mission. It causes us and calls us to move. And then last week, we asked this question, well, what does moving look like? Where are we supposed to move? How does that work? And we talked about what it means to serve and being a servant. And that one of the main actions of the kingdom of Jesus is to be a servant. We talked about how Jesus, or serving, puts on Jesus for the world to see. When we serve others, it puts on Jesus for the world to see. This morning, we're going to look at the third action, that what Jesus does, it drives us towards. The gospel drives us towards action. And the third action that we're going to look at today is one that seemingly gets a lot of maybe publicity, both positive and negative. It's an action that Jesus gives us to guard our hearts against the things of this world. It keeps our attention in what matters most. And really, this action protects us from some of Satan's biggest tricks and schemes. I want to pray, and we're going to find out what that is. Jesus, I'm grateful for today. I'm thankful for this church. I'm thankful for these people. And Lord, we pray that during this time as we open your word, God, I pray that they're not just words that we hear and they're not just ideas that we think of, but Father, we pray that your word speaks loudly. God, if we had a great week this past week, God, I pray that we will give credit to you and recognize what you've done in our lives. And God, together as a church, that we will celebrate together. God, there's some of us that we had a terrible week. And Father, I pray that you will bring peace to our hearts and God, that we can lean on one another as your church. Jesus, I'm thankful that because of what you did on a cross, a room full of sinners, God, we can meet here right now and we can live with the hope of heaven. But God, I pray that we not just keep that hope to ourselves. I pray that we are offering it to others. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Whenever I was homesick as a kid growing up, I loved when 11 o'clock rolled around. It was 10 o'clock here, but 11 o'clock on the East Coast. The reason that I loved when 11 o'clock rolled around was because that's what time The Price is Right came on. All right? That's what time The Price is Right came on. And I loved watching The Price is Right. Okay, there was a game on The Price is Right, okay, pictured here behind me, called High and Low. Some of you maybe remember this game, but they give you some items and then they show you a price, and your job is to guess if the actual retail price is higher or lower than what it is that they show you. Hey, by the way, I've never heard actual retail price more than when I watch this show. Okay, but the idea is that you guess, and so you see something like spaghetti sauce there in the middle, and they show you a price, and you see the dollar amount, and your guess is higher or lower, and then you potentially win better prizes and everything like that. It's this guess, and with this guess, you potentially open up ideas moving ahead, or you close doors, right? Like if you guess the wrong thing, it closes doors for you to win more prizes. But if you guess the right thing, it opens up more opportunities for you to win. This game of high and low, along with a lot of other games on The Price is Right, I love to watch. The difference, though, is that's a game show. And unfortunately, a lot of times we play the same game with our money. We look at different investments that we want to make, and we'll say, well, where is it on? Is it worth it? Is it higher or lower on my priority list? We look at different organizations we maybe want to make a donation to, and we say, well, are they higher or lower on my priority list? You see, when it comes to our finances, we probably never think of it as a game of The Price is Right. But really, when it comes to the action of giving, and when it comes to our finances, we play a similar game. And the problem is that what ends up happening is as we assess all of these choices that we're going to make, we lump the church in with that as well. And the action of giving, maybe it takes a higher priority or a lower priority based on what there is to do and what's going on. Do I have enough this week? Is it higher or lower? Did I bring any cash this week? Is it higher or lower? Do the kids have a lot of things to do this week? Or is it the grandkid's birthday this week? Is it higher or lower? And as always, kind of the warning, before we put up our defenses and get grumbly about the preacher talking about money again and the action of giving, I want us to ask a question. I want to ask a question of ourselves, to be completely honest, that before our defense shield goes up on this topic, because we're uncomfortable. Is our discomfort because of our obedience or disobedience? And when it comes to this topic, am I once again uncomfortable? Am I uncomfortable because it's not in the Bible? Or am I uncomfortable because it steps into an area of my life that I've not handed over to Jesus? See, when you read through the story of Jesus, there's a lot of aspects that we love to look at. We love to look at his grace and his forgiveness. We love to look at the way that he teaches. We love to look at the way that Jesus spends time with those who are making poor choices, but yet still he brings them back in because it helps us feel like we belong. It gives us an identity because we resonate with the people making wrong choices. But more than anything else, Jesus talks about money, and so we're going to as well. Maybe not more than anything else. But one of the reasons that I'm convinced that Jesus addresses this topic is because he cares deeply for the people that are following him. He's passionate about you and me and about us loving him more than anything else in this world. And he knows the one area in our life that we're going to love more at times than him is our finances. And so Jesus steps into the uncomfortable. He steps into some of the dark areas. And this is not a plea for us to just give more to the church, but it is a call for us to be obedient in what Jesus has called us to be obedient in. And so what does that look like? If you brought a Bible, we're going to be in Luke chapter 16. Now, Luke chapter 16, you're welcome to look it up on your phone. It'll also be on the screen to follow along. Luke chapter 16, Jesus is telling a parable. A parable is a story with a meaning behind it. And so he's telling a parable to teach his disciples, as well as it's kind of a mixed crowd. It's not just his disciples. There are also some Pharisees, which are the teachers of the law, the real rigid, structured guys. They are also listening in as well as a part of this crowd. And so Jesus tells this story to teach a lesson. And it's not just a lesson for the people that are in the room, it's a lesson for us today. Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. It says, Jesus told the disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot manage any longer. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than they are the people of light. Now, I tell you, Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who would give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees, who loved money, heard this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your heart. What other people value highly is detestable in God's sight." So what we just read could really be broken up into two parts. The first part is the story, and the second part is kind of the application of it. And as Jesus begins to tell his story, he doesn't just kind of tiptoe into the uncomfortable. He just jumps 2 feet right in the middle of it. And he says, all right, there's this guy, he worked for a master. The master was rich, had a whole bunch of stuff, bunch of property, a bunch of money, and he was entrusted in the job of managing all of the possessions, all the finances, everything like that. The master finds out that he has been dishonest. He's been embezzling, something like that. And he tells him, you are about to lose your job. You're going to lose your job. Immediately the man recognizes, listen, I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm not strong enough to do physical labor, and I'm too proud to beg. And so what is it that I'm going to do to take care of my future? And so what the man does, is he goes to those who owe a debt to the master that he worked for, because even though the master tells him that you are about to lose your job, there was still a couple days paperwork of getting everything together in order for him to be dismissed and for things to be handed over. So right now the man still has the record book. And he goes and he finds out who it is that owes his master money. And he begins to just slice their debts in half. He takes some off the top and he says, you don't owe this anymore. Why is it that he did this? Because this man recognizes that if I do this now, while I still have a little bit of control, that when I lose my job, the people that I eliminate half their debt or some of their debt, they'll let me stay at their house. If I make friends with what I have right now, if I make friends, then my future could be better. If I use what I have right now, then I could set my future up as way better. And the master learns of this, and he commends him. Why is it that the master would commend someone that really just took more money away from him? Well, one reason, because culturally it would have been understood, is that this master's name would now be broadcast all over town as like a good citizen. Like, this guy eliminated some debts. More so Jesus uses this story to teach us something. Now, immediately when a lot of Jesus' parables you look at, and it's easy to see the hero, right? It's easy to see like the good guy in the story sweeps in and, picks the broken man up and brings him to the inn and he's healed, and like that's the hero of the story. But all of a sudden now there's this guy that embezzles money, takes debt off of his master, and then all of a sudden now he's getting a compliment. And it begs this odd question of, is Jesus complimenting dishonesty? And the answer's no, he's not complimenting dishonesty. But what Jesus is doing here is Jesus is using a bad example to teach something good. And I mean, we've seen this before. I mean, if this guy can do it, surely you can do it, Whatever the case may be, like, if this guy can still pull his life together, there's hope for the rest of us, It's that type of thing. Like, here's the mistakes of this person, but even the person making all the mistakes still was wise enough to use what he had to set up the future. And this is what Jesus is teaching. Jesus steps into the uncomfortable, and he steps into the uncomfortable topic of money, and he says, listen, what you have been given, the blessings that you've been given, the riches that you've been given, the money that you've been given, we are given an opportunity to use it to set up our future eternity in an incredible way. You see, this man had a choice of what is it that I'm going to do with what I have during this short time. And what he chose to do in that short time was use all the blessings at his disposal to set up his future well. And with our short time on this earth, living with the hope of heaven, what are we doing with our resources and our finances to set up heaven well in our future? But not just ours. One thing that Jesus is clear about is it's not just about us. It's that we've been blessed in such a way to open up doors for other people around us. That the action of giving and letting go opens up doors for kingdom change all around us. He says, use the blessings that you have been given to open up doors for people around you that they may learn of the goodness of God as well. You see, when it comes to our finances, the baseline question that we have to decide in our lives is, does God own it? Because that then it dictates all of the other choices that we make. Does God own it? If God owns it, then it's easy to give it to him, right? But if we own it, then all of a sudden everything becomes a lot harder to let go of. All of a sudden Satan starts using this tool kind of as a backdoor for selfishness and greed and pride. And so the baseline question when it comes to our finances, when it comes to this action of giving, because Jesus gave to us, is, do we own it? The answer would be no, we don't. It all comes from God. But whether or not we live with that truth is maybe something different. The second realization that we have to come to when it comes to our finances is, I'll have to give an account for it. I'll have to give an account for it. I mean, we see that from the very beginning. The master calls the man in and asks him, what is it that you have done with what I've asked you to manage? Does God own it? And I'll have to give an account for it. You see, Jesus, as he jumps into this uncomfortable topic, it's not because he's in want. It's because he wants the people that he loves to love him more than anything else. And you and I both know that it is real easy for us to hold on and to love money. When I was growing up, I played baseball, and there was a lot of times I'd play third base. Sometimes when I was playing third base, if a guy would get around to third base where I was playing on the opposing team, I would start talking to him. And so there was a distinct time I remember this guy hit a triple. He gets all the way around to third. He's kind of huffing and puffing for breath. And I look at him, I said, good hit, man. He looks up at me like I'm the opponent. Like I'm supposed to be really mad at this point. Like he just got a triple on us and everything like that. I said, good hit, man. And he looks up at me. He said, you talking to me? Well, who else just hit the ball? Yeah, I'm talking to you, like, come on. And so I would talk to him. My reasoning for this was really twofold. One, there was a little bit of kindness in me, but two is I was trying to distract them from the batter coming up after them. And so as I stood and I talked to this guy, he forgot about the guy that was now up to bat and missed the first two pitches of what was happening. Like that was my goal. Probably not the smartest thing, but that was my goal in talking to him. Is if I can distract him from what's going on, then he won't be as involved in the game. This is what Jesus is doing as he steps into this conversation with his disciples and with the Pharisees, is he is trying, desperately, he's trying to distract them and to teach them away from the game of the world when it comes to finances. We live in a game that says make more, build more, get more. And so Jesus steps in and he says, no, the hope is heaven. The goal is heaven. And what we do with what God has given us can set the stage for heaven-changing relationships. And so we're willing to let go of. As Jesus continues to teach and he begins to apply this to those who are listening, he makes this contrast of those who are children of light and not. And he says, unfortunately, those who don't live in the light at times are better with the resources that they've been given than those who live in the light. Jesus is calling out the church and his disciples, you and I, who understand the grace of Jesus, who understand what it is that he is calling us to. He says, listen, there's a lot of times the people who have no hope of heaven live better in their finances than those who do have the hope of heaven. Which only goes to prove that in our lives, a lot of times, he doesn't own it yet. He doesn't own it yet. Why is Jesus teaching this parable? And really, what does it call us to do? Our truth for this morning is this. Every blessing God gives is for responsibility and not reward. Every blessing that God gives is for responsibility and not reward. Jesus is trying to remind his disciples what has been given to you. It comes with a responsibility. It's not just this reward because maybe you're good or because maybe you showed up at church or because maybe you helped someone else out and so now you get all of these blessings. It's a responsibility for you and I to swing open the doors around us, to open the doors with the way that we give, to allow other people to experience heaven and to learn of the grace of Jesus. As Mark Moore says, we are a people of distribution. We are a people of distribution. You and I, we live in a world that says keep and store up. And Jesus says no, give and serve others. You see, if we're honest, what we do with our cash dictates our view of our Creator. Jesus is contrasting two worlds here in this story. And he says, listen, in this present world, there are traps and there are schemes and there is selfishness. And as followers of him, we're called to look forward to this, to the second world to come, to the hope of heaven, to where things are good. And everything we do in this short time sets the stage for who will be with us and when we'll get there. Our present worldly opportunities, they create future heavenly opportunities. And so question, what are you doing right now with your present financial blessing to create heavenly opportunities? But what are you doing right now with your present financial blessing to create heavenly opportunities? You see, this man, he saw that he had a short time to impact his future. And so he was willing to do whatever it took to take care of that future. You and I, we are here for a short time. And what we do here sets up our future. The way that we are operating right now. The way that we are choosing to spend right now. And how motivated we are to give and be disciplined in giving. Are we preparing for heaven well? Or are we just trying to make ourselves feel a little bit better? We don't often like to stand in the shoes of the Pharisees. That's probably more uncomfortable than anything else. But I think there's a time or two as Jesus calls the Pharisees out for justifying their actions and loving money. We could probably stand in those shoes a time or two, couldn't we? Every blessing that God gives us is for responsibility and not reward. Are we being responsible with the finances that He has given us to open doors for heaven in the future? It's not the idea that we want more. It's not the idea that the church wants more. It's not the idea that we need to get more. It's the idea of obedience. And that we not play games in our short time. But that we love Jesus more than anything else. And when I said earlier, He jumps in with 2 feet, his last couple verses here, I mean, He just kind of kicks with 2 feet when He says, you can't love both. Either you love one or hate the other. You despise one or love the other. But you can't do both. And at some point in our pursuit of loving in the world and loving Jesus, if we try to pursue both of those paths, at some point they're going to collide at our blessings. It would be better for us to make choices now that open doors for heaven in the future than for that collision to take place. The blessings that we receive from God, every one of them, it's given with responsibility and not reward. When it comes to our finances, as uncomfortable as it might be, when it comes to the action of giving that protects our hearts and our minds of letting go so Satan doesn't convince us that it's ours, are we living in this world or are we living in the next? With the way that we operate with our land and the way that we operate with our finances, the way that we operate with our talents that create those opportunities and those blessings. Are we living in this world or are we living for the next? The way that we give and let go, the way that we practice the discipline of tithing, the way that we give, are we living in this world or the next? Because every blessing that God gives, it comes with responsibility and not reward. When I was a senior in high school, I took several different art classes, and our art classes, they kind of had a competition between one another, and if we would do something good in class, they would give us this fake money, and it was just printed out, copied on paper, and they'd cut it up and they'd give it to us. And the idea was for you to accumulate as much fake money as possible, and you collected it as a class. And so as individuals, you would earn it, and then it would give you an amount for your class. It was one day I was in Mr. Rolinski's art class. And we were in another teacher's room, and there was a file cabinet underneath one of the computers. And one of my buddies, it was open, and he opened it further, and inside there was a file folder of all of this fake money. And he pulls it out and he kind of tosses it on the table, and it was right at the end of class. Our teacher, he was already on the hall getting ready to dismiss everything. And as it sat there on the table, we kind of looked at each other. And we were faced with this choice, this opportunity. Either we fold it back up and we put it in and just go on as though nothing has happened, or we could take a bunch of this fake money and kind of slowly turn it in and boost our class's total up. Because the end prize was a pizza party at the end of the semester. I would love to tell you that I folded that folder back up and put it back in the drawer, but we didn't. We each grabbed a handful of that fake money and we walked out the door. And over the next couple days, we slowly began to kind of feed it into our class's total. About a week later, Mr. Rolinski realized that there was an absence of a file folder, and there was a whole bunch of this fake money that was missing. And so we walk into class the next day, and all he says is at the beginning of class, he says, "There's a Judas among us." And I didn't get what he was saying the first day. He said it 4 times, and everyone just kind of stares at him. And then he just went into teaching. The next day we get to class, and he says, "There's a Judas among us." He said it 4 more times. It took me to the 3rd day to realize, to kind of connect the dots. And he started class. He said, "There's a Judas among us." And I realized what he was talking about. And so about halfway through class, we were working on different projects. I went over to my buddy. I said, "Listen, he's talking about us." And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "He's talking about us for stealing that money." He's like, "No, he's not." And so then, in probably not the best type of scenario, I had an opportunity to share the Bible with him a little bit. But I said, "There's this guy in the Bible, his name's Judas, and this is what he did. He stole money, and he sold Jesus out. And so he's calling us out for stealing this money." He goes, "Oh, okay, well, you're not going to tell, are you?" I was like, "Man, I don't know." So I went up to Mr. Rolinski after class, and I said, "Listen, we need to talk for a second." He's like, "Okay." And I told him what I had done, and we had a conversation, and he told me how I shouldn't have done that. And that conversation, it bothered me a little bit. But I told you it was a competition between different classes, which involved different art teachers, and they all did the same thing. I had another art teacher. Her name was Mrs. Parks. I had her for photography as well as a homeroom teacher. The next day I went to Mrs. Parks' class, and I had gotten to know Mrs. Parks a little bit better, and she knew, as a senior, she knew what I was going to college for. She knew what I was going into training for, to be a preacher and everything like that. She pulled me out in the hallway. I didn't spend a lot of time out in the hallway, but this one I remember. And she looked at me and she said, "Matt," she said, "out of everybody in this class, you'd be one of the last people I would think would do this." And I just kind of stood there. And she said, your credibility, it's been taken down a little bit." But then this is where she got me. She said, "Matt," she said, "I know what you want to do with your life. I know what you want to go to college for. I know what you want to train to do for the rest of your life, and you're bringing this dishonesty into that." And when she said that, I realized something. That my choice wasn't just about me anymore. Now, all of a sudden, the ministers that I had grown up listening to and following, now all of a sudden they're represented in my dishonesty. And my parents who taught me to love Jesus and grow up loving Jesus, now all of a sudden they're brought into my dishonesty. And my church that I grew up going to, all of a sudden now it is brought into my dishonesty. And I realized in that moment that my choice, when it came to even fake money, it impacted a whole lot more than just me. Because now Mrs. Parks' view of the church and of the Jesus that I was learning to love was tainted as well. You see, as Jesus steps into the uncomfortable, it's not because he just loves to live there. It's not because he just loves to argue with the Pharisees. It's because he loves us so much that he does not want us to wrestle and be confined by the traps of this world. Because he recognizes that the way that we live impacts people around us. And when it comes to our finances and our money, Satan's going to try every way he can to trick us. Well, Jesus wants to free us. He wants to give us his power and his blessing in order to open up more doors around us. He wants to take care of us and provide for us. He wants to give us life, which is why he went to a cross. To give us hope past the times when we fall into the traps, and to give us hope past the times when we try to own it, and to give us hope when we don't know what's next. The blessings that you and I have been given, they're a responsibility. They're a responsibility to open up doors of heaven for everyone around us. This morning, are we being responsible with what God has given us? Are we living in this world? Or are we living for the next? With the finances of our life, are there other people that are learning to experience heaven because we are willing to move in our giving? Let's go ahead and stand together. We're going to worship and sing. We're going to celebrate together the hope that Jesus gives us. And maybe the best question that we can wrestle with as we worship and sing and just evaluate in our lives is, does he own it? Does he own it? Have I given him full control? Have I let go? Do I move in my giving? Am I compelled to practice the discipline and the worship of giving because I recognize what Jesus has done for me? Because I recognize the way that he has changed my life and given me hope. And so I do it joyfully and cheerfully because I don't want to own it. I just want to live in the responsibility of the blessing. This morning as we worship, based on Jesus the giver, are we living in this world or are we living with the hope of heaven? Let's sing together.